What's up guys, Shawnthebro here. Today we're going to be doing local multiplayer in the Super Smash Brothers tutorial. So I'm using a keyboard for all of these guys. It's a bit hard for me to move more than one at once. But you can see it is happening. It is in fact occurring. They can all jump. They can all use attacks. You can see the guy behind the steps on the right was using something. They can all charge their attacks. Like you'll see here. There you go. So yeah, there's a lot going on here, but some of the good things about this episode are A, we get control over all of our players, local multiplayer. That's the most important part. But we also fix our HUD in this episode because of this. So our HUD was one character, 0% mannequin, and then all white boxes because we didn't have accurate player references. And because of the way we're doing the local multiplayer, that's going to fix this too. So now we'll have a proper heads-up display that has these mannequins in here, or has your player images or whatever in here. So it's going to fix those two things. It's also going to kind of make the spawning a bit easier. And lastly, we're gonna move our camera to be an outer camera here, so it's not attached to the player. That way we can see everybody. We're not going to do any logic with the camera today, but we are going to add it to the game. That way we can have a different view. Alright, so let me open this because I don't know why that got closed. Anyway, so we'll start with the code. There's not much we have to do, but there's a few important aspects here. So, if you watch the fighting game tutorial, local multiplayer episodes, then you'll know that I made different functions for the different players. So, if you want to use two inputs on one keyboard, I had two different functions. The reason I'm not doing that here, Smash is theoretically support up to as many players as you want. I say 8+ in this video and 8+ in the thumbnail because, you know, Super Smash Brothers has gone to 8 players. However, you could do as many as you want. And you're not going to want to make like 16 of these functions in here. So instead what we're going to do is we're going to go through and go to the functions we already made. Basic attack, move right, forward smash attack. These ones were already good. So these functions right here, whoops. These functions right here should all be made blueprint callable. So you function blueprint callable above all of them. And that's because we want to actually be able to call these in blueprint. Alright, so that's the first thing. There is another thing here in your character class. You should also add an integer called player number. It's not going to be the most important thing here. We'll use it for the HUD, but it's actually going to come in a lot of help later in the series. And starting it when we use it for multiplayer is a very good place to start it, because we can set it right here, kind of forget about it, but then use it later when we need it. Okay, so you're not going to change anything in the CPP file except set your player number. Set it to 0 by default. Everything else you can see is the same if you've been following the series. If you haven't, and this is the first episode, then don't worry. You don't have to have anything in your character class. These are just variables we're making and functions we're setting up so that you can have access to them in Blueprint. And if you want to go back to the start of this series, I'll link an iCard in the top right corner for you right now. Alright guys, so there's one other thing we're going to have to do in code. Basically, go to your game mode. We're keeping num players, and that's different from player number. I know it's a bit confusing, but player number is like P1, P2, P3, P4, whereas num players is just the total number of players in your game. Okay, we want to add another variable, and I called this players. So it's a T array, which is just Unreal's version of an array. It's a more specific type of array. It's kind of like a list, actually, more so than an array. But basically, it's just an array. So what you're doing is you're going to make a T array of your character class and make it a pointer. Make sure you have the little asterisk here. We'll do proper cleanup for that and stuff later for those that are familiar with pointers. Okay. So, and make sure it's a blueprint read write edit anywhere. That way we can see it in blueprint. This is going to store all of our actual player references. So the reason we're going to do this is because we can actually use the blueprint to look at individual players for our HUD, and also when we're determining who to possess when the characters are spawned. That's the rest of the stuff we're going to change in code today. We are going to add a new class, but you'll see I haven't filled out anything for it. So I'll show you how to add it, but you don't have to put anything in. It's just going to be relevant what you parent it from. Okay, so if you go to add new C++ class, go to player controller right here. Next, name it whatever you want right here, and then hit create class. You don't have to do anything with that class that you just made, but it's important that you make this because we're going to be spawning player controllers so that we can possess the new characters that we have. So, what I mean by that, the reason I can control all of these with a keyboard is because they have separate player controllers that I spawned manually. If you had multiple controllers, they would all have a different player controller ID, and thus it would be easier to control them. But since we're doing this on one device currently, and for testing at least, even if you don't want to keep it that way for the final game, then you're going to need to manually spawn player controllers and possess them. So, once you made that class, again, it doesn't matter what code is in there right now. It just matters that it exists. You could technically spawn a regular player controller and have the same effect, but we are going to add stuff later to it now, or excuse me, we are going to add stuff to it later, so for now, it's good to just leave it alone. Just make sure that it's there, that way when we edit it later, you don't have to change the class we're spawning. Okay, now we're going to get into the actual blueprint side of things. There's not a ton that we have to change that we've already done, but there is quite a bit that we're going to add to the base game mode and the HUD. Let's go into our level map so we can get our camera set up. So where we were spawning our character HUD, and this will be moved later in the series, but if you have been following, you'll know we go to begin play, we create the character HUD widget and add it to the viewport. That's where we see our HUD from. I want to do something new, which is setting a view target with blend, which essentially just sets the camera we're going to be using. So if you go into your map, you'll see I made a new camera. So blueprints, functional, logic. Here we go, default camera. All I did to do this, I didn't change any logic with it yet. Add a new blueprint class, go to type in camera, and type in camera actor. Select it, call it whatever you want. I called mine default camera because this is going to be my default fighting game camera. This is what we'll edit down the road to make it zoom in or pan over or whatever. Okay, so I can't, again, sometimes this will work, sometimes it won't. I'm not sure why. Unreal doesn't like to make this easy for us, but when you right click in your level blueprint, it should try to create a reference to variables that are in the scene. So if you right click, look right under the call function on default camera 2, or like whatever you have over here at the very top above all your different component listings. You should be able to create a reference to something. Should be your camera. Again, the reason I'm specifically pointing this out, I've had it several times where I open the editor, I have the camera in the scene, because you need the camera in the scene for this to work. So make sure you drag your camera in like this. I already have one. I'm going to delete that. But make sure you drag your camera in. I did this right here. You can see the view of the camera, so make sure it's facing your characters and all that. Go into your level blueprint. You just blueprints, open level blueprint. Then, right click. You should have this variable here. Create a reference to it. It'll look like this. I already had mine. Mine's right here. And then get your, it doesn't matter. You need a player controller for this. For right now, player index 0 is fine. You don't have to actually go through your player references or anything. We're going to make the camera logic a lot more specific later. So for now, that's fine just to have it so we can see it. Then you're going to want to type set view target with blend. So set view target with blend, this one right here. So you'll be able to see it if you drag off your player controller, not the camera. But you can also take off context sensitive and just do set view target with blend. If you're not familiar with this, context sensitive means should I display things that are relevant to the node I'm dragging from. So for example, this node is actually from the player controller. So if we're not off of a player controller, it won't show up unless we have that unchecked. Once you do that, so your camera's in the scene, and you have this guy chilling, all set up, you should have a camera view that actually looks at where that camera is coming from. If you don't for any reason, you can go in, excuse me, you can go in and go to your camera components and either delete them off your characters, or at the least you can disable auto activate. things like that. So I've never had to do this. I have heard of people needing to either delete their camera component entirely, so just press delete on this or right click and, well, you can't right click on it, but you can press delete on this. Or, yeah, just turning auto activate off. Now, I've never had that issue, but I want to bring it up. Apparently it happens, so just watch out for that. Make sure you can actually get your camera view where you want it. I'm going to close this now since we no longer need it. I'm going to add some stuff to the character BP, to the HUD, and to the game mode. And then we'll be done with our local multiplayer segment. So, the next thing that's important to say is we should make a SSB template character BP. So, essentially what this is we already have our side-scroller character BP. So, up to this point in the series, we've been using, if I can find it, nope. Must be in side-scroller CPP blueprints. Here we go. We've been using this character. Now, he doesn't have anything as blueprint, so he just shows up like this. You can do open full blueprint editor to actually see what nodes he has. Again, he's got nothing right now. You could do it in here. However, we kind of want to go away from side-scroller character because we want a character that we can use as our base character. You could use side-scroller character and just rip out anything you don't need, but I think it's much easier to just make a new character, new character blueprint, and then assign your parent class to the code class we have. So this part's up to you. However, I'd recommend this. This is the easiest way you can attach a model to something without having to find the path to the model in code and assign the mesh and things like that. It's just it's more work than I think it's actually worth. So if you go to wherever you want to make this new blueprint, add a new blueprint class, as usual. This time we're going to make it a character class, like this. And, well, I didn't actually mean to make it, so I'm going to delete it. But make it, I'll show you again. Go to make it. Don't make it just character. My bad. I was getting a little bit ahead of myself. You could just make it character, but what would be way better is to make it your SSB template character, the code class we have. This guy right here, where we made all our functions and things like that. Okay? So, click that guy and make him. And then I just called it SSB template character blueprint. So we did add stuff to him. I did add my mesh to him as well. So it should be noted that if you go to, trying to figure out, I think it's on the, here it is. So if you go to the left side in components and click on the mesh, you can pick your actual mesh that you want. You can also choose the animation blueprint that you want. So those things are both good to know. Good to have, because you're going to want to change to the mesh that you want to use, which, we have the little skin mannequin. I called mine default character mesh. And then default NMBP is the animation blueprint we worked on earlier in the series. So once you have that working, you can now spawn this character, this SSB template character, and he'll basically be the exact same as the side-scroller character was. Now that we're switching from the side-scroller character, this thing we changed earlier in the spawning episode, the default pawn class, should be changed to the SSB template character BP. Because it's now going to affect the way things work. Before with the side-scroller character, we didn't want to spawn him right off the bat because he's got some extra things that we didn't really want, and it was kind of causing trouble with the random spawns. Make sure you set your default pawn class to be this new character that you've made. Also, update your player controller class while you're in here to be your base player controller. That's the class we just made in here that we didn't touch anything with. Because we're going to be spawning them, so we want to actually use that class. Makes sense, right? Okay. Now I'll stop jumping around, but those are all the parts that I thought were kind of intertwined and should be done together. That way it makes sense why we're doing them. Basically, you make this new character, that way we can add functionality to him that is independent from the default Unreal template character. Then, in our game mode, we spawn the new character that we're using, and we set our new player controller class to be the character class that we made earlier. Or the player controller class we made earlier, I should say. Okay, once you've done all that, now we can finally go through and fix up everything that we did in the past to fit our new needs and finish up the rest of the local multiplayer section. So for now, let's start with the base game mode BP, because this is going to be the most important part. You can spawn a character without having any of this in here, and have it work. You can spawn a character without the character HUD being updated properly and have it work. But this is what's going to be needed to spawn the characters correctly with our new class and actually be able to possess them. Okay, so again, if you've been watching this series, and if you haven't been, I'm going to link the spawning episode in the iCard in the top right, because we're going to be using some of that logic today, but modified. If you have been watching the series, you'll be familiar with this part. Num players, for loop, spawn player. We did add a -1, and that is because we now have our default pawn class being used, so it's going to spawn a pawn for us by default. That's okay. That's what we want now, because now we have the proper character class, our new character that we just made. I'll show you how to handle that. We actually are taking the player from the player that's automatically spawned and setting him at a checkpoint, or at a player start, and then setting the player start properly. So don't worry, we're still doing all the same stuff we've been doing. I'm going to go over this, but I just wanted to show you this is all we had in the past, and now we're going to add some stuff to it. So, now that we have a default pawn class, we are automatically spawning a pawn when the game mode is created. What we want to do now is teleport him to the correct spot. Because the reason we took this out is the side-scroller pawn, he would just spawn wherever you wanted. He would just spawn in some random spot that wasn't related to our player spawns at all. So we removed him. We said, no, we'll spawn all of our own pawns. Well, we don't want to do this. This makes our work harder in the long run. But now that we have our own character, this will be easier to control. So, in begin play of your game mode, instead of going right into the for loop and spawning your players, let's do a little bit of setup. Let's get all actors of class. Literally get all actors of class. This one right here. Player start. Okay. We're going to get the first one. 0. Because what we don't want to go through and set all the player starts to taken. We want all of our player starts to be valid. However, the very first character that spawns can always get 0. If you don't want them to always get 0, you can do random integer, and just give it a max of how many player starts, like if we have 4. There you go. Now the first character that spawns will have a random player start to start at. So you can do that. Either way, it's not a big deal. Just so that he's only getting 1 of these values, not all 4. You don't want him to set all spawns and taken, otherwise everybody else after the first character that is spawned will not have the right spawn point. Okay, now we're going to do something, and we're going to get the actor transform from the player start. That's what we're doing here. Get the player starts transform, because we're going to set our actors transform in a second. But just know we gotta grab it for now. Set your player start tag to taken. Okay, get all actors of class. Now we're gonna get all actors of our class of our template character. Right now there should only be 1. It is possible to have more at this point, which is why we're gonna be looping through. However, we should only have the one that is the default pawn. Either way, if this is the case, we're gonna loop through. We want to go through our players variable. So make sure you built your code and compiled, because we added the players in the game mode. Remember, this is an array to keep track of all of our player references that are in the game. We're going to add this character to our players reference. So as soon as he's spawned, we're going to the begin play of the game mode. You'll say, hey, there's someone in here. Let's add him to our player references list or array. Then we take the index of him and add him to the player number, set the player number. This will be changed later to where whoever's player 1 on their controller or player 2 on their controller or whatever can set the player number that way. For now, this is a good indicator because this will make sure everyone is unique, and that'll be good for the HUD because we need everyone to be unique so we know whose stats to display. So don't worry, this will be changed later by just changing one node, but for now, this will do the job. Okay, then lastly, set your character's transform. Set actor transform. You just drag off your node right here and set it to the player starts transform we grabbed earlier. This will teleport the player that is automatically spawned to one of our I'm going to switch that to 3 because I can't actually remember. In random, 0 does count. So yeah, you'll want to make that 3 if you only have 4 of them. Okay, so anyway, make sure we teleport our player, set actor transform, from the get actor transform of the player start that we ended up randomly selecting. Excellent. Then we don't do anything else after that. Instead, when the loop is completed, when the player loop is completed, go down here. Okay, excellent. Now, this is the same logic we already had, but just make sure you do num players -1 now, since we are allowing 1 player to spawn by default through the game mode. You could also lower the amount of players, so we have it set to 3 by default. You could technically make it 2, and just have it run through those. It's up to you. But you're going to loop through, it's literally a for loop, and call this function spawn player. Now the spawn player we've also already worked on. However, we are going to add a few more things to it as well. So I'll go through the whole thing. Told you, this one's a bit of a complicated episode, but local multiplayer is not as easy as you would probably expect coming from something like Unreal. At least it's not as easy to set it up in a way that you can easily change it later and have a non-set amount of players. Like, players can drop in, drop out as they want. Okay, in spawn player, we're doing the same logic we already did right before this. The reason we're doing this here is because these characters have already spawned. That's why we want to set the player start tag and teleport them there. The characters that we're spawning in have not already spawned, so we need to spawn them, possess them, and then set the player spawns to be correct. It should be noted as well, we will be obviously including AI enemies in this series, so down the road we'll do a check to see if this is a match against all human players, or all or all AI players, or a mix. So don't worry about that for now. We're still going to want to do this for now. Okay, get all actors of your player start again. I'm doing a for each loop with break. Break means if you drag the code flow into the break, it will stop the loop on the spot. This is good to stop iterations that don't need to happen, or iterations you don't want to happen once you reach a certain point, which is the case here. So loop through your player starts. Grab the player start tag. Make sure it's not taken. And then if it's not taken, we're going to spawn actor from class. Spawn actor from class. This guy right here. You're going to select your base player controller, which is the code class we made and didn't change anything with. And that's this right here. Spawn actor base player controller. You're going to use the transform of the player start right here and set that as your spawn transform for the player controller. We're still using the spawn transform for the character, except we're no longer spawning a side-scroller character. We now want to spawn our SSB template character BP, which is the same class we changed the default pawn class to. Make sure he's also being spawned at the get actor transform from the player start. Then we want to possess the character with the new player controller we have. So possess and unpossess are what basically makes a player controller take control of a character in the scene. So possess, you take in a target as the player controller. So you can see the player controller line is going from the return value after we spawned him into possess. And the in pawn is right here from the character that we're spawning. So basically what this is doing in a nutshell, look through the player spawns. See ones that are open. If you find one that's open, spawn a player controller. Spawn a character. Make the player controller possess the character so that we can control him. Set the player start tag to be taken. This player start should no longer be used. Someone is already spawning here. Then we want to add the player and set their player number, just like we did outside. Then, if you want to do this, you don't technically have to, I don't believe. However, this is going to be much better to actually break once you're done with this. Because here's the thing. If you didn't do this, you would actually go through and loop through all these, and you would see that the player start tags are not taken, and you would spawn them all in this loop. Now, that won't be an issue, because technically, this is just a for loop going through 4 times. So it doesn't matter if this player start is taken or not. It'll spawn players, and they'll still be possessed properly. However, to eliminate all those extra loop iterations you don't need, you should technically drag off your player number, your set player number, and break the for loop once you've spawned a new character. Alright. So the reason you should do that on top of the performance is if you have more player spawns than the amount of characters you have in your match. For example, we set 8 player spawns and we have 4 players currently active on this scene. That will actually cause problems. Okay, so there you go, guys. That's how to spawn characters in your blueprint, in your game mode blueprint, and make it so that they actually spawn where they should. And you'll see this is the random thing I was talking about as to why it's a bit weird. And they kind of spawn on top of each other. So don't worry, we will be going over that. But I just wanted to show you can spawn random characters. Or characters in random spots. And then you can control them all. You won't be able to control them yet, don't worry. You didn't miss anything. We need to set up their controls to be able to control multiple characters. But now they should be properly spawning. I'm going to leave this at 0, since we're not technically accounting for that case if they spawn on the same one. There we go. But what I'm going to do now is I am going to switch over to the character BP. So, there's a lot we have to do to add here as well. The reason we're doing this is because we're doing this all on one player controller. Again, if you have multiple controllers or your game is intended to be played with multiple controllers, this won't be a big issue. However, if you want to test this all on one input device, one arcade cabinet stick, or set of buttons, or keyboard, you're going to need to set it up in a particular way. So let's first of all go to our edit project settings and input. Most of you will know the drill by now. But we have to set up inputs for our attacks and our moves. So we have all the basic ones for player 1. Jump, debug, take damage, basic attacks, forward attacks, all that. What we want to do so that we can use these on the same input device is set up these same attacks but with different controls. So jump P2, basic attack P2, forward attack P2. Same with P3 and P4. You can see they're all different controls. So they're kind of wacky controls because you're not meant to have 4 people playing a keyboard. However, this is a great way to test it, and if it comes down to it, nothing wrong with 4 people playing on the same device. As long as it's actually capable of doing it, you could still have fun. Same with axis mappings. Make sure you have move right P2, move right P3, move right P4. Now, you'll notice I actually have gamepad left thumbstick x-axis on all these because this gamepad will be independent. You won't be controlling 4 different characters with one gamepad, so you can have the same controls in any of these. But we won't be having them separate anyway because if it's a different character, he'll just be using move right. He won't be using move right P2 and all that. That's the reason I wanted to point that out. So we'll get to that and actually using different controllers in a different episode. However, just know it will work right now, even out of the box. It takes some work to kind of organize it so that everyone can have different controls and everyone can still function independently, regardless of your input devices. Okay, I'm going to close these now, but you see what I've done. I've set up different... for all the actions we've had, I've set up a corresponding action for players 2 through 4. Again, if you're going to have more on one input device, which you could, then you're going to want to add even more. But what we want to do in our character BP that we just made earlier, and we assigned our mesh and animation blueprint to, now what we're going to do is we're going to set all the other player references. And we're doing this because, again, we're using one player controller, so we don't have the freedom of just saying, hey, player controller ID 1, or like getting this player controller reference. We have to get the player reference themselves. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go to begin play. We're going to get our game mode. Literally just get game mode. Drag off of it, cast it to our game mode, which is SSB template game mode, or wherever you have this stuff in. Then, if it succeeds, you're going to loop through the players that are in that game mode, which were set up when the game mode spawned in the BP here. Remember, that's why we were doing this add functionality. We're adding all of our player references together. Loop through the players, check their player number, which we set earlier, and assign them to the proper player reference. So a few things here. Player number, we're going to do a switch on it. And just if you're 0 through 3, well, you're either player 1, 2, 3, or 4. You can click the little add pin to add more. So this is just a switch on int. This right here. And then you just click add pin as many times as you want, and it gives you more options. So you could do this through 8, through 30, through 100, doesn't matter. We're going to make 4 variables, player 1 through 4 references. So just add a new variable, hit the little plus. When you just call it player 1 reference, player 2 reference, 3, 4, and then look for your character class. So these specifically are SSB template characters. They are the code class. The reason they're the code class and not the blueprint class are because the code is not familiar with the blueprint class, thus it is an array of the code class characters. I know that can be confusing, but whatever is in your array for players is what you're going to want to make here, because that's where we're getting the data from the set. Okay, so make sure you make 4 of these. They're all the same type. Now the reason for this is we can set our player 1 through 4 reference in here because we're going to be using them a ton. So you don't technically have to do this. You could actually just loop through this, get the right player index, or search for a specific one, but that is going to be a lot of work for all these controls we're going to add. Now these are all going to be the same, all this logic you see here, except this is player 2, this is player 3, this is player 4. It would probably be good to add a comment and be like player 2. And here you go. So this is what a comment is in Blueprint. It's an actual box that you can name, leave a little note, and then it separates logic. That way it's easier to read. So this is player 2, and these could be player 3, player 4. Okay, so what we're doing here is all the input actions we added in this window, in the input window. If you go to type in their name, like jump P2 for example, you'll actually be able to just access that input action. So jump P2. Jump P2 action event right here. If I click this, it brings up this, which we already have. I just want to show you. Now, do this for all your inputs that you just added for players 2, 3, 4, however many you have. This means whenever the corresponding button is pressed on your input device, as long as this character exists, it will find the corresponding player 2, 3, 4 reference, whatever, and perform their logic on that character. That's how we can get our actual characters to move, jump, attack. So just make all your references, basic attack P2, forward attack P2, move right P2, and you can see these are P3, P3, P4. You don't need to do P1. P1 is already handled in the code. And the other ones will be as well if, again, you have different input devices. For one input device, make sure you do this and have them set up differently. P2, P3, P4. Then, what we're doing here is something you've probably never seen before, regardless of what tutorials you've been watching from me, if any. So, I'm going to explain this a bit. So, this is a get is valid reference based on one variable. So, this is pretty cool. What you can do here, because we want to check if all these are valid before we use them. If they're not valid, we don't want to use this, right? It doesn't make any sense. If the player reference is not valid, well then they shouldn't be able to jump. Otherwise, that'll give you errors. It could crash your game. We want to make sure all these are valid. So it's a bit tedious. You don't have to do it in editor if you're just playing around, but I'd highly, highly recommend it. What we're doing here, we're going to get our player 2 reference. Then you right click on it, convert to validated get. This is your reference still. This is your player 2 reference, but you can, it has code flow, so you can bring the code flow through it, check if it's valid, check if it's not valid. Okay, that's what this is. So all these boxes you see, these are all player 2 reference. They're just converted to a validated get. These are all player 3 references, all player 4 references. Just check if it's valid and then do the corresponding function. So jump P2 was pressed. If player 2 reference is valid, then we want to jump using the target of player 2 reference. If it was released, we want to call stop jumping on player 2 reference. Basic attack on player 2, forward attack, forward smash attack if it was released on player 2, and move right on player 2 with the axis value that comes from move right. So we know to move either left or right. So the forward smash attack released is something we covered in the last episode, which I'll show you an icon in the top right corner now. Essentially, that's when how long you hold a button for. If you release it, you do your attack and it charges damage. That's how you use smash attacks. Okay, so with all that out of the way, do that for all the players you need. Player 2, player 3, player 4, however many. You don't need to do it for player 1. Now you're done with the character and you're done with the game mode. Lastly, to wrap up this episode, let's sort out the character HUD, which has a ton of stuff on it. So get ready. But what we're going to do, before, it was one character who had their image, their percent, their name. And these were all white boxes because these characters didn't really exist. We were using player character 0, player character 1, all that junk. Now we're going to do it the correct way and actually do it based on the player's number. Because that's how they would be set up along here. That's how they are in Smash. I think in most games that are like this. Okay, so in the event graph of your character HUD, we did not have anything last time. We're going to do the exact same thing that we did for the character. Actually, I should have done an is valid here. That was a good point. I did not do that, but so you can copy over the logic if you want. It's this thing. Again, I added an is valid here. This is probably good. You should always check, no matter what, you should check that it's valid before using a reference when possible. It doesn't decrease your speed by much, but it will always prevent a crash or some sort of error that's going to pop up there, assuming that you can catch it. You can see I've done this up to 8 players because you could have more references you want to use. This should also be noted. These references, which I don't know where my variables are. That's weird. I have a details panel that was covering them. These player references, you add them the same way as we did as well. You see they're just SSB template characters. But what should be noted here is these don't all have to be on one controller like with the character BP. These you're still going to want to do regardless because you want to reference to each character so you can get their damage, their image, and their name. So you should do this for all the characters you intend on having. Alright, now, if you haven't watched the Super Smash Brothers HUD and damage video, I'll show you an iCard in the top right corner right now for that. Okay, so there's a lot going on here, but we have 3 bindings for every player. To set up the bindings, I'm not going to get into it because, again, this is in another episode. That would just be easier to watch that. But all these bindings that we did, you see them here on the right here, that bind the text and the image. We're going to have to change all of them. And I know, and I'm very sorry, but it's what we must do. So, okay, for the image ones, we want to instead use our player 1 reference instead of all this stuff. Before it was like get player controller. No, it was like get character. Whoops. Yeah, it was get player character, and then you were casting it to our character, and then we were getting to see if this was valid, and then doing all this stuff. No. We don't want to do any of that anymore. We want to make our lives easier in the long run, and also just cleaner. I know it means a lot of change, but this is way better. Do your validated get, that we have done in the character. So these nodes that I was telling you about right here. For each of these, get your reference. So for player 1's image, we want to get player 1 reference, convert him to a validated get. We want to grab his character class. Right now we only have the mannequin, but do a switch on it. Drag off switch. That's right here. Then do the normal stuff that you've been doing. So I didn't change any of this for any of these. All I did was change the way we're getting our character. So we're using player 1 reference. That way we don't need multiple characters for this to work. If the player 1 reference is valid, then we're going to do this logic. For the character name text, it's the same thing. Just make sure you're using the player 1 reference. Okay? Instead of the player character 0 and all that. Same with the damage counter. Make sure you're using player 1 reference. Okay. Now, all these are the same. These are player 2, player 3, player 2, player 3, player 4, player 2, player 3, player 4, player 4. But you can see, I went through them all, so you could pause it if you want. But all I did was take out the other extra junk we didn't need and the casts in here and all that bad stuff, and just use the validated get. Make sure that the player reference is valid, and then do your logic. Okay. With all that said and done, you should now have the ability to play your game, control your characters, have a camera that's actually overlooking all your characters so you can see them all in action. You should be able to use attacks with all your characters, as well as your charged attacks that we talked about last episode. You'll see they charge up, and I can also release them at a certain point, or just press them and it'll go all the way through. They can all move, they can all jump. There you go. So you should have local multiplayer working, you should have your character HUD working for as many players as you'd like, and you should have characters spawning for as many characters as you would like working. So this was a very long episode. In fact, the longest I believe we've done in this series and for the YouTube tutorials in general. But it's a long process to get this stuff working for especially more than one player on one single input device. So anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope this helped you. Please let me know if you have any issues. This was a very long episode. It's very possible that you know, something simple either didn't make sense and that threw off the rest of the episode, or you know, something silly I missed or I didn't explicitly say, and obviously if you don't know that, it could, you know, you wouldn't find that out, and then that would screw things up. So feel free to correct me if I missed anything. There have been a few episodes I've always updated the description where I've missed a thing or two that I should have said, because, you know, I kind of forget that, basically forget that I didn't mention it, right? Like, I'm just like, oh yeah, this should always be checked. That's just kind of how this works. But then I realized, like, oh, I should have said that, obviously. So please feel free to correct me at any point. Let me know if there's anything I missed. Let me know if you have any questions. So feel free to leave a YouTube comment. I definitely will answer it. However, the Discord will be a much better place if you have specific in-depth questions. I can post videos and pictures and help you out, and there's a lot of other people who also are familiar with this tutorial who would be willing to help out. So yeah, please feel free to join that if you want. The link's in the description. I actually can't put an iCard to that, but we'd be happy to have you. We've got over 90 members, so we have plenty of people to help out, and we'll be happy to get you sorted out. Especially if I screwed something up, then you can come tell me how bad I am. Okay, guys, so lastly, just an extra note. If you'd like to come support us on Twitch, Shawnthebro27 on Twitch. We play Dark Souls Wednesday, sometimes called Souls Wednesday, Resident Evil Friday, and Saturday is a nice multiplayer game with friends, things like that. So it's a fun time. It's a wonderful community, and we do lots of challenges there, like I put socks on my hands, or I take my glasses off, or things like that. So if you want to come join us and have some fun, that's a great way to do it. But lastly, the best way you could help this channel is to just subscribe. That's it. It's that simple. Subscribing means more to me than anything, and it gives me more information about what videos you liked, which ones helped you, and which ones you're more interested in. Okay, guys, so I've been talking for the last 45 minutes, and I still have to go do another voiceover, so I'm going to get going. But thank you so much for watching. Yeah, please let me know anything you need, and I'll see you in the next episode, guys. I'm Shawnthebro. Goodbye.